तबाह जम्मू कश्मीर टीवी रियासत के हर बेजुबान तबके की तर्जुमानी करता है। जेके टीवी जो इजहार राय की मुकम्मल आज़ादी पर यकीन रखते हुए बैनुल अक़वामी तौर पर मंजूर और तस्लीम शुदा हक के इजहार राय का पासदार होने के साथ साथ ये वाजे करता है कि इदारा किसी भी शो में होने वाली गुफ्तगू या इस्तेमाल किए जाने वाले अल्फाज का जिम्मेदार नहीं।
Excellent. Hi, good morning. And welcome to another episode of Shairana Moasom. Today I've got an amazing artist to introduce you to, and I can't wait. But to start off with, as usual, it's one of my poems. So today the poem I've chosen for you is from Kashmir to Yorkshire. I suppose it's from Kashmir to Yorkshire. It's from lush hills and noisy streams to patchwork moors and crashing weirs, from Kachmach, Bathua, Kachanar, and spinach curries, Lesure for pickles, Takri for andi, Shetut and Paware for snacks, bear dried for winter, devoured around a fire pit, hills covered with fallen clouds, skies full of stars, moonlight of 1,000 watts. I left all behind for my lifetime home, Yorkshire. To reservoirs, Bronte moors, canals, rivers, rushing streams, and waterfalls. Purply pink heather, taller than me, bracken, mossy rocks, and mighty oaks. Cheek reddening air, eye soothing waters, postcard perfect hills. To red currants for jelly, gooseberries for chutney, and blackberries for jam. Bilberries, raspberries, and apples for nourishing treats, with friends along long walks. From a strong Kashmiri girl to a tough Yorkshire woman. My landscapes are like me, not just pretty to look at. My cheekiness comes across in my poems. And the lovely guest that I've got today, you'll get to see all of his wonderful traits come across in his interviews and his words. So the person I'm inviting today is Matt Abbott. And Matt Abbott, he's a poet, activist, and an educator from Wakefield. His critically acclaimed spoken word stage show, Two Little Ducks, explored working class issues and refugee crisis. The show's poems were published by Verve in 2018. His debut kids poetry collection, A Hurricane in My Head. I love the names and titles. Wait till you hear the rest of the names and titles he comes up with. So, A Hurricane in My Head. It was published by Bloomsbury in 2019. And Matt founded a spoken word record label Nymphs and Thugs in 2015 and is also known for fronting indie act Skint and Demoralised. Did I tell you about the names? So let me welcome Matt to stage.
Hello, how are you doing?
Hi, Matt. I'm very well, thank you, and welcome to my show.
Thank you.
I love your background. It's nice and colourful.
Yeah, you could say that. It's not a traditional route into poetry, I don't think.
Well, it's a colourful works for poetry. So I've got a couple of questions to ask you. The first one, but I'll start off with the names, is how do you come up with such fabulous names? Nymphs and Thugs, Skint and Demoralised. Yep.
Yeah, do you know, Nymphs and Thugs, Nymphs and Thugs was something that somebody said about Northerners. It was a comment that somebody made about Northerners. And
Right.
originally, when I set up that record label, I wanted it to champion Northern voices.
Yeah.
And I wanted it to maybe champion Northern voices that wouldn't necessarily be at the forefront of any poetry conversations. I wanted it to be alternative.
Yeah.
And it just kind of felt a little bit subversive and maybe a little bit provocative, which is what I
Yeah.
wanted to do when I established the label in 2015.
Yeah.
And one of my highlights was when Selena Godden was shortlisted for the very prestigious Ted Hughes Award, the Poetry Society's Ted Hughes Award. And we went to the award ceremony in London, and Carol Ann Duffy was reading out the shortlists, and she was like, Selena Godden, Nymphs and Thugs. And like the look on her face when she said it was quite amusing.
Oh, that's wonderful. I can picture that and her saying it. Yes.
Yeah, it was just meant to be that subversive and kind of slightly provocative. On behalf, I mean, it's no longer a label that represents just Northern voices.
Yes.
And Selena Godden was the reason for that. But originally, that's where it started. And I have to admit, Skint and Demoralised was actually taken from a lyric by a band called Reverend and the Makers. They had a song called Heavyweight Champion of the World, and basically their front man is why I started writing poetry. So originally it was actually my username on his fan forum, and I used it as a
Right.
stage name on MySpace, and it just went and went and went. But yeah,
Ah,
I quite liked it at the time. I was 17, and
I'm
I
glad
thought
I
it was
asked
tongue
you.
in cheek.
Yep, skint and demoralised. Yeah.
I thought it was tongue in cheek, but now I'm 35 and it's not.
Well, it still works. If you think about like the northern aspect of it, and you think of the working class aspect of it, I still liked it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Same. So what I'd like to know is about your poetry journey. I want to know when you started writing poetry, and why.
So this was it. So the Yorkshire music scene was alive. Arctic Monkeys were perhaps the main catalyst for it, but you could go to any venue in Wakefield or Leeds on a Friday night or a Saturday night, not even knowing who was on the bill, and
Mhm,
it'd be full of people you knew, and the bands were great,
mhm,
and the music scene was wonderful, and I was really enjoying that. And then I discovered this band called Reverend and the Makers.
mhm,
Before they released any music, I'd latched onto them, and the frontman used to perform really short bursts of spoken word in between some of his songs. And it
mhm.
completely blew me away because I'd never seen anything like that before. I'd never heard anything like that before.
Yeah,
And through him, I got into John Cooper Clarke, and then I got into Arctic Monkeys, and it just opened up this world of like alternative punk poetry. And I never realized that poetry had such a strong connection with the alternative music scene. So
yeah,
as a 17-year-old, I couldn't write music, I couldn't play an instrument,
yeah,
but I could write words and speak them. And I'd always been obsessed with rap and like the
yeah,
syllables and the flow and the delivery. And so
yeah,
I just felt like it was something that I could try, not in an arrogant way, like, oh, I could do that, but
yeah.
I already had the tools that I needed to do it. And
Yes.
so I started writing these poems, and I started volunteering to MC events in Wakefield. So
Right.
I'd be MCing gigs all around Yorkshire within a few months, and it was my
Yeah,
job to do a poem and then introduce each band. And I just loved it
yeah,
because
yeah,
people were like, "Oh, I never expected to hear a poem." And when you said you were going to do a poem, I
yeah,
nearly left the room, but that were all right. That, and I kind of loved that
yeah.
I was putting poetry in this space where it didn't belong.
Yes.
Um, and I felt like I was not that I thought I was amazing at it, but I felt like it was something that I obviously had a skill for, if that makes
Yeah,
sense. And so that's what I loved about poetry, is that you can kind of, as an entry point, most
yeah,
people have the resources they need, and that's what I
yes,
love about it.
yes. Um, in terms of barriers then, because one of the things I know, you go into schools and teach, and I go into schools and teach. And when you've got a class full of girls and boys, girls naturally, if you say poetry, they're like, okay, yes, we'll write a poem. And boys, primary school, they will. But if you head to secondary school, they're like, boys don't write poetry, or like everybody else, boys do write poetry, but they're not going to like easily come up and own up to it and say, oh, I'll write a poem. And there's always a few in the class that feel that they have to write something silly because they can't say that it's be seen to write poetry. You're a boy. How come you thought it was all right to go around writing poetry and sharing our music scenes?
I know, yeah. Well, this is it. I suppose I'd left school, and
Mm.
because I was doing it in a, it, I almost felt like I was a musical artist without any music. And I know that sounds weird, but for me, it didn't feel like I was performing poetry. It felt like
Yeah.
spoken word was this like a cappella songs almost. And because I'd seen John McClure doing it, and because I'd learnt about John Cooper Clarke, it
Yes.
just felt like suddenly poetry went from being this really dull thing that you had to pull apart and analyze at school to
Yes.
being so unexpected it was almost cool. And I know that
Yeah.
sounds weird, but the perception of it completely flipped.
Yeah.
um and because I'd always been so into rap, I'd always been so into flow and syllables and delivery like that, i
Mm.
i and I was really into like the streets or Jamie T. I kind of felt like I was doing that but without music, basically.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is strange because I hated poetry at school. I was never interested. Even like a year before I started doing that, I wasn't interested in poetry at all.
Yeah.
And what I love now when I go into schools and I'm chatting to, like you say, boys in particular, is
Yeah.
challenging that preconception
Yeah.
and almost tricking them into writing poetry. Because I will never sit there and say, okay, write me a sonnet. I'll say, I want you
Yes.
to describe your favorite place, but use only the senses. Or pick
Yeah.
an object or item of clothing that means something to you, and I want you to write a little message from the perspective of. And I kind of afterwards I'll
Yeah.
go, "Oh, that was a poem." I'll be like, "Oh, what? Do you know?"
Yes.
But
Yeah.
also I'll talk to them about rap. I'll speak to them about
Yes.
rap and hip hop because there are so many strong links. Like the word rap is rhythm and poetry. Do you know what I mean? So like, I kind
Yes.
of, because I was in that position, I'm able to say, "Look, I get you,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
hear me out," which I think
Yes.
makes a difference.
I think it certainly does. Ita, your first book is for children as well. Will you tell us about that?
So my debut collection for children, A Hurricane in My Head. And it's strange. I had been doing work in schools, but for some reason I've never actually thought about writing for young people. I don't know why. And then I was very lucky. I was asked to write a poem for Eureka, the National Children's Museum. It was their 25th birthday, and they wanted a 25th birthday poem. And I used to go to Eureka as a kid. Obviously, I loved it. So I wrote this poem and I put that online. And then somebody who had been a huge fan of my band but lived in Dubai saw my poem on Facebook, and they worked for Bloomsbury but in Dubai. But then they contacted somebody who worked for Bloomsbury in the UK and said, "You need to contact Matt Abbott." And they contacted me and said, "Have you got any kids' poems for us?" Now, I didn't have any kids' poems, but I was very excited that Bloomsbury had got in touch. So I wrote 5 poems. I went to the meeting and they said, "Great, we'll have a collection." And I was like, ah! But so I'm kind of incredibly fortunate how it worked out, but it completely transformed the way that I write. And I absolutely loved writing that collection. And now writing poetry for young people is one of the most joyful things you can do. I really, because it forces you to see the world in a different way. And I'd always written about politics and social issues and references and whatever. You can't do any of that. Like you can't reference Brexit or whatever. And I kind of loved that it stripped me down to the human experience and seeing the world. And so I'm writing that collection was a huge part of my career. A Hurricane in My Head. I loved it. It's just about the transition from year 6 to year 7. Sorry, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to ask you that. I was going to say, what age range is it for, and what kind of poems do you talk about?
It's like 10 to 12. 10 to 12 is the age. So that age where year 5 are starting to become have a bit of swagger. And then suddenly year 7 they're like, ooh. And that transition I think is incredible. Like I don't think there are many other stages in life that everybody goes through such a big step from year 6 to year 7. So the social aspect of it, feeling like everybody else knows exactly what they're doing, whereas you're winging it. There's a lot about that because I'm 35 now. I still feel like that, But a lot of people at that age, we don't realize. Even anxiety over the school photograph being taken, but then it also tries to address stereotypes. So there's a few poems in there that address gender stereotypes, from boys not showing emotion to girls not playing football. I challenge things like that as well, because I think at that age it is important. And even now when I talk about, there's a poem in there called "Football is Not for Girls," which obviously that's not the point of. And sometimes the boys are a bit, "Ooh," and I'll be like, "Well, look at the Lionesses, lads. Do you know what I mean? Like, come on!" And I quite like having that conversation in classrooms. I've always got to make some kind of point. I can't just do a poem for fun anymore. But
Part of being adults, I think we let go of some of that part, don't we?
It's a poem about this, but it's actually about this.
The double meaning, the double layers going on all the way through.
Yeah.
Like you said, I'm asking you to do this. I'm asking you to write a poem.
Yeah, exactly.
In terms of that poetry collection, we're going through a time where it's like, I'm Muslim and brown and Pakistani, so I should only write Muslim and brown and Pakistani. Well, you're a 35-year-old. What gives you the right to write children's poems? Did you do research? Did you speak to them? Did you ask them? How do you know you did it right?
That's a good question. That is a good question. I tried to draw as much as possible on my experience as a child, just because, I think some of it is still relevant, but I am also aware that I was their age, a long time ago. So I guess I spend so much time in classrooms. I do have conversations, and I'm aware of, because there's stuff in there about social media. I can't even begin to imagine having social media at the age of 11 or 12, but I'm aware of how it affects their lives. And so I try to address issues that makes them tick and the things that they speak about. But also like the beauty of childhood and seeing the world through a child's eyes. It is something I can just about remember. But I know, it is a strange thing. But some of the poems in A Hurricane in My Head, I am writing from the voice of a child. Whereas now, when I write children's poetry, I am sort of writing more as myself, but speaking about things that I think that they'll relate to. Because I think I've kind of done that in the first book, and now I need to step into my own.
Yes.
But yeah, no, the voice that you use in a poem is something that you should always consider. And I'm aware that as a white heterosexual male, like that is something I need to be very aware of. My only get out is I was a kid once, so I can get away with it.
I think I'm a bit flexible on this topic. So I was just asking it to be kind of devil's advocate, just because
Yeah,
it's one
yeah,
of the
yeah,
things that everybody gets asked these days, don't they? I think
yeah,
there's a bit of leeway in a lot of work that we read from other people's perspectives. And yeah, there's a debate about it, but I wasn't asking you for the debate. I just wanted to know what you're going to say.
Fair enough. I'm always up for a devil's advocate or a debate. That's fine. It's all
Um,
good.
in terms of your schoolwork, would you tell us a bit more about what you do, how often you go in, what age ranges you work with, what you like doing?
Um, I spend most of my time with year six.
Mhm.
Most of my time with year six. Partly, I'm involved in a poetry slam project with an organisation called Authors Abroad.
Okay, yes,
So at the moment, that's like 25 schools from around Calderdale, and each of them
right,
sends a team through to the poetry slam final. And
okay,
I I'm not really into slam in general, but I think in the
yes,
schools context, it works really well, and I like that it
mm,
gives them that finality and it gives them the opportunity to
yeah,
perform on stage and get that confidence and working in a team. In general, I love working with year six. I think it's a
mm,
great age because they're confident and they're chatty, but they've still got that childlike. They're not too
yeah,
shy to share their imagination. To be fair
yes,
though, I do love working with year seven, eight, and nine because
yeah,
year seven, they're adjusting, and I like to encourage them to write a lot to reflect on that transition that they're still going through
yeah,
because I think it's a
yes,
healing tool.
yeah,
Um, and I also volunteer a lot to work with year nines who are not engaging, who are not. It's not an academic thing. It's more pupils that just don't really engage and maybe struggle with their attendance. I love
yes,
working with those groups because they've got something to say. And I think the thing about poetry is it gives you a voice. And like,
yes,
when you're in year nine, you get told, sit down, shut up, go there, be here, do this, do
yeah,
that, do your tie up, whatever.
yeah,
And I love to be like, well, what do you think?
yeah,
Here's your voice. And so for me,
mm,
like when I go into schools, sometimes it's just for enjoyment. Sometimes
yeah,
it's just to see poetry in a different light. A lot of
yeah,
the time, I like to give people the confidence and the voice that poetry gives because that's such a powerful thing. And
yes,
when I was their age, like I didn't behave at school, like, and I don't know if a poet coming in year nine would have changed my life, but it might well have
yeah,
done. Might well have done, considering I've gone on to. But yeah, it's just
yeah,
this is another thing I love about poetry. It has so many different uses in
yeah.
in so many different rooms. It can,
Means so
it,
many different things to different people
yeah,
all the time,
yeah,
doesn't it? Yes.
yeah. There's nobody who it's not potentially relevant for to some extent.
No, I agree. I agree because I cover from children all the way to adults, from like all the way up to 80s and all the kind of ranges and the languages and stuff. I absolutely agree with you. There isn't
Yeah,
anything I can't think of that you can't get something out of it. You can't make use out of it. You can't use it as a tool to express what you're wanting to say or cope with or deal with.
yeah.
I'd like to hear a poem, please.
Well, seeing as though we're talking about it, I suppose I'll do one about from my children's collection.
Please.
So this is called Big School. I don't know
Okay.
about you, but when you're in year five and year six, you refer to it as Big School, and then
Yeah.
obviously when you're in year seven, it's a no-no. But okay.
Yeah.
In a sprawling concrete universe, a labyrinth of corridors where everybody knows the way, all except for me. Every classroom's in disguise, every corner is a mystery. I got lost after geography, and now I'm late for history. My cheeks resemble beetroots, my books are heavy as bronze. I fight for breath whilst older kids just glide about like swans. Teachers tap their watches, they sigh and roll their eyes. But this school is like a city, deep and vast as summer skies. One by one, the other kids are joining queues and talking, but I'm completely clueless as to whereabouts I'm walking. I know they call it big school, but these buildings are gigantic. It's super chilled at break time, but after bell it's frantic. And these posters could be hieroglyphs, they make no sense to me. The stairs go on forever, and I'm late for lesson three. I've got my pencil case, my planner, my lunchbox, and my books, but still I'm feeling paranoid from all the funny looks. How come they're so popular, so good at making friends? I bet they're all just lonely too. I bet they just pretend. I find it hard to swallow that everyone knows the way. It's a maze the size of Mexico which changes every day. It's a Rubik's Cube of half familiar landmarks in my mind. And why are the scariest teachers the most difficult to find? How on earth will I ever get a single GCSE when everybody knows the way, all except for me?
Oh, well done.
Oh,
Yeah.
cheers. That was the first one that I wrote, actually.
Yeah.
It was the first young person's poem that I wrote because I just, like I say, that first week of year 7, it's so vivid. And for me,
Yeah.
that was in the year 2000, but I still
Yeah.
remember that feeling of just
Yeah.
dread and isolation and insecurity. And yeah,
I love that poetry gives us a chance to put into words, and then millions of people can read it and go, "Me too, me too." Yeah, I
yeah,
remember that. That's exactly what it was like. Because you were saying
yeah,
it, and I was thinking, like, back to my secondary school, and remembering all the different corridors and the different floors and all the different places you needed to go to. And our IT used to be somewhere in the basement, and
yeah.
I used to be scared to go through the corridors to get there. Yeah,
Almost got a
thank
front crawl your way through. Like, yeah.
yeah, got there now. The next question I'm going to ask you about is about your writing process. So we all write differently. We write at different times, different places, um, different different methods suit us. Do you, as to how do you start writing? Have you got a thing about I'm going to write every single day? Is it whenever something comes? Is it a case of right, I've got to try this form now because I haven't tried it before? How do you write? What do you do?
Good question. At the moment, my wife and I are really busy with work, and also we have a son who's 1 3/4. So
Yep.
quite often now it has to be like, okay, Thursday, I've got 2 hours, I'm going to write then. And it gets to that 2 hours, and I just go because I'm like, this is my time. And
Yeah.
in a way, it helps because you sometimes when you allow yourself writing time and you end up procrastinating, oh, I'm doing
Yes.
research, whatever. You don't
Yeah.
do any of that. You just go bang, bang, bang. So like, it's either a block of time that I've specifically carved out and said, no, I need to write now. Yes, I have got 100 emails, but I need to write. This is what I need to do, which is strangely hard because like the admin always rings the alarms in your head, right?
Yes.
Or yeah, I do like if I've got 10 minutes, I do try and scribble as much as I can in a notebook or on my phone. And I kind of use Instagram for that, um, which sounds silly, but when I've got little nuggets of a poem or a little image or a little idea,
Yeah.
I quite like using Instagram as a
Mm.
sounding board, but also to put myself under the pressure to
Yeah.
like I haven't always got time to spend 2 hours working on a full poem, but if it's a
Yeah.
little 5 or 6 line excerpt,
Yeah.
it puts me under the pressure to sharpen it, and that almost makes my writing more effective on an ongoing basis, if that makes sense, because I'm kind of putting it out there. Um,
Yes.
but yeah, at the moment, it's a matter of in terms of so like I find it really difficult to write about something completely random. I have to be writing within the confines of a project. So like, okay,
Okay.
I'm working on a
Yeah.
collection. These are the themes, and
Yeah.
then I'll get a piece of paper and I'll write down 50 ideas, potential
Yeah.
ideas for poems, and then I'll pick.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to do that, that, and that. Which
Yeah.
I don't know if that's me being a little bit strange or I don't know, but I almost find it easier to do that. So I think
Yeah.
this is since so Two Little Ducks, which is my debut poetry collection, was originally an hour-long stage show. And so
Yes.
when you're writing an hour-long stage show,
Hmm.
it's every poem is performing a role and it's part of this strand and it weaves that
Yes.
narrative.
Yeah.
So since then, I've kind of been stuck in that mind frame. I can't just be like, oh, today I had an idea to write a poem about a tree. I personally can't do that. I don't know why, but
Right.
you know, I quite like it in a way because it means that I go further and further and further into a specific theme. And sometimes when you've written 6 or 7 or 8 poems about a particular theme, that's when it starts to become interesting. So I
Yeah.
guess it's my way of making sure that I dig deep enough into something. I can't just write spontaneously. But I don't know if that's
Mhm.
because I've been writing for 17 or 18 years or if it's just a phase I'm going through. How about you? Do you think, are you similar or are you different or?
I'm different. I can do that, but I seem to do that with when I'm writing my novel. So
Yeah,
I have to have a synopsis. I have to have the outline of each chapter, and then I know what I'm doing. And then
yeah,
whichever one I fancy that week or that day, I'll get up and write. But when I'm writing poetry, it's not poetry. I kind of write for different themes. Sometimes it's just an external stimulus. So depending on what's happening around the world, and if it's really got to me, I've got to put it in words just so I can work and get on with the day. So it's my kind of way of therapy, like dealing with
I hear
it.
you.
It's on the page now. Now I can do something. And I also write it for kind of digging deep. So before I go to sleep, I'll often write, and I'll just sit for a couple of minutes and see whatever comes from inside. And that could be anything. I've
That's
no idea
nice.
whatever's coming out, and I'll write that. And that's something that I'll value, because okay, I didn't know that about myself, kind of thing. And now it's on the page. Okay, I've got that now. I didn't know I was thinking about that. Or I was in my
Yeah,
subconscious. So I kind of write for those things. So when I'm consciously writing, I do consciously write if I've got a project. Um, I mean, if I've gone into schools and I know I need to focus on a particular theme, or if International Women's Day is coming up and I'm writing for something like that. So I'll write focus, not normally though. That's not my normal way of writing poetry.
that's lovely. What a nice way to end the day. And I guess at that time when you're just winding down and you're in a slightly different headspace, aren't you?
Yeah.
But this is the problem, right? So I only write consciously. This is I write consciously. I need to learn
Yes.
to write. Like I need to learn to be
Yeah.
more free with it. I'm
It'll
going to
just be
take
being
that as an
still.
instruction.
If you just see, I suppose tonight, I suppose try it for 1 week as your
Yeah,
homework. It's just before you go to sleep, have your screen open and allow yourself 2 minutes when you don't talk, and and you've got to do a bit of mindfulness. You are listening to yourself inside. So basically, listen to yourself inside. Often it comes as a physical reaction, some movement in your chest, something tingling in your arms or whatever, and you're basically asking that sensation, what are you saying? And you put that into words. So
that's
that's your
lovely.
homework for this week. And I
Thank
shall
you.
do the opposite. I shall try to think. I've got a couple of collections that I've had in mind. I will start making a list of the things that need to fit in those and focus a bit more, do some
Fair
conscious
enough.
poetry work. Thank you.
Sounds good.
I'd like to hear another poem if you have one, please.
Yeah, okay. I might completely flip it. So to be fair, how are you? How do you feel about political stuff?
Love political stuff. Right.
Sometimes
A bit of it.
this is only a really short one, but sometimes I do use it in the way, like you say, where you have to respond to something in the world, and it's just because that's how you, as a poet, instinctively respond. This is a really short one, and basically, when I let me see, if I do that, then
Yes.
I'm using text that is taken from an estate agent's advert, and
Okay.
if I do that, then it's my words. So
Okay.
basically, it
Yeah.
is an estate agent offering beach properties in Gaza.
Okay. Wow.
Wake up! A beach house is not a dream. A dove plummets by your windowsill, strangled by phosphorus clouds. Phone our hotline to reserve your spot. We have begun clearing rubble and fending off squatters. Limbs wave amongst bulldozed bricks. A mother's wail resonates around a shell. Email us now to crystallize your future. Fight, liberate, settle, detach, cleanse.
Wow.
And I, when I saw, so it's like a picture of like a beach with like an architect's drawing of a beach, and it just
Yeah.
says a beach house is not a dream, and I couldn't, and like the rest of the text that I read there, genuinely that's word for word.
Yeah.
Yeah, stuff like that. That's what I love about poetry, is it gives you an opportunity to respond and get that anger out and kind of frame it in a way, like, not that I'm expecting any poem like that to ever make any difference, but it gives you that opportunity to kind of frame it and join the conversation in a particular way, if that makes sense. And
It also gives other people, I find, a voice, because like
yeah,
sometimes when you read something like that, people I'm going to go just slightly off tangent, but I lost my mum last year, and I started writing about grief posts, and I wanted to stop because I thought it was quite private, and I'm sharing this on Facebook, and I had quite a few close family members that said, please don't, when you write it, I've gone through the night, it's been really difficult, and I woke up in the morning and you've written that, and I've read it and I've cried, but I've thought that's what I was feeling, and I couldn't say I'm glad she can. So when you've written that poem, because I've read this, I've read similar posts, and even as a poet, I haven't known how to respond. Sometimes things feel too close.
yeah,
Um, you know, I suppose if something's about Muslims and you're a Muslim, or if something's about women and you're a woman, you almost have a little bit of a reaction. You think, if I'm going to react to this, people say, oh yeah, there goes an angry person, so being defensive. So I mean, sometimes I think you can't respond if you feel, and it kind of clamps you up. So it was really nice to hear somebody else had, because I could relate to it.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. It's this. That's it. I suppose it is framing it in a way that allows other people to organize their thoughts through the way that you framed it, I suppose. And this is another, to relate to the question that you asked earlier. Like this, it does kind of relate to it, and I do sometimes feel paranoid that, as I'm a white man from Yorkshire, why am I writing about Gaza? Like, it's got nothing to do with me. Why do I think that my voice is important in this? And I'm not doing it because I feel like I'm going to make a difference or I'm more important than anybody else. But like, as a human being witnessing that happening in the world, that's my response to it. And I kind of, I feel like, as a human being, like, witnessing, I'm only talking about witnessing it. I'm not imagining that I'm in that situation or whatever. I feel like that's kind of what poetry is. It's a shared human experience that we're either choosing to engage with or ignore, and that's my personal choice. There is I must say though, there is quite a toxic aspect to the poetry scene where people who aren't writing about it are accused of being
Yes.
complicit or ignoring it, and I don't think that's fair at all. It's each person's individual choice. That's just what I've chosen to do. But yeah, I do sometimes get in my head about, well, who asked you, sort of thing. But I'm only putting it on there on my channels. I'm not trying to,
I don't think we should. It's like I was saying to you before. It's like I was coming from the fiction perspective, because from fiction perspective, now people are told, aren't they, if you're not this, this, and this, then you can't write this and this. And I started writing before those things became really popular, and I've written about all of those things. That I'm not, I'm not gay, I'm not a boy, I'm not a man, I'm not white. And I've written about all of those things, and I'm not sure that I'm not going to publish them just because now it's not PC to be able to say those things. So, and again, same with poetry. If you didn't respond, you'd be like, well, he's a poet and he's got a voice and he hasn't stood up for, people. And if you've said something, well, how does he know anything about it? I think some common sense and humanity first.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuance to it, and it's complicated. And I think sometimes it is wrong to write as somebody else, but a lot of times it's not. And at the heart of it is that human experience, right? Like you say, common sense. I think judge each case on its own merit.
I kind of I joke with my friends that I've got a character who's a widow, and I took the piece of work to my creative writing group for some feedback, and I read the work, and at the break a few people came up. It came up to me and offered me their condolences, and I had to explain that she literally is a character. My husband is perfectly well and healthy, and I would be quite shocked if he found out that I've killed him off. So I think as writers, we can use imagination. I know there are kind of like, parts and places where, I understand. I want to know a bit more about Nymphs and Thugs.
So I, at that point, hadn't been published, and I saw the publishing industry as something that was very elitist and hard to access and a closed door. And to be honest, because I've got into poetry through listening to it and watching it live, I actually at that point didn't really read much poetry, which I do now, but the poetry on the page just wasn't what drew me in. And so a lot of the time, when I went to discover a new poet, like any videos I found on YouTube were quite poor quality, or there'd be one video from 8 years ago. And I just felt like, in terms of a poet putting yourself out there, it's really difficult, right? And I wanted to offer an audio release, a high quality audio release, as something that was not to replace a book, you can't replace books, but something that could be out there, that this is quality, this is polished, and also I was doing Edinburgh Fringe in 2015 and I wanted something to sell. And it's like, well, I'm not going to be able to publish a book in that time, but I could do a CD. And I just remember CDs. So I just liked the idea of...
I remember cassettes, Matt. You won't, but...
No, my first single was on cassette. I just got in the cassette. Yeah. Anyways, I just wanted to create a vehicle that offered poets an opportunity to have something that was an audio piece. And I I've not released as many albums as I would like recently. We've moved more into being an events producer, really. But
Right.
some of the audio projects that I've produced, I'm really proud of, and you wouldn't be able to create that in a book. So I'm just happy that I've been able to do that for some people. And like, I still prefer to listen to poetry and watch poetry. I love reading poetry. Don't get me wrong,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
I'm far more likely to read a poet's collection having heard them in the first place, if that makes sense.
I'm very similar in that sense. What I get out of an open mic, I get different things from a book. But what I get out
Yeah.
go to poetry reading is completely different. I know about Nymphs and Thugs, other people don't. Which kind of artists have you interviewed or recorded? Where is it available?
So the highest profile act would be Selena Godden. Selena Godden's a poetry icon, really.
Yes.
We released an album for her called Livewire in 2017, which is a combination of studio work, live festival recordings, BBC sessions, and that's the release that was shortlisted for the Ted Hughes Award, the Poetry Society's Ted Hughes Award. But
Right.
Toria Garbut as well. Toria Garbut is really rapidly establishing poet. At the time, she'd only just come onto the scene, and
Right.
putting the album out for her, I like to think, opened a few doors, was kind of part of a catalyst for her growth as an artist. She soon afterwards went on tour with John Cooper Clarke. Kirsty
Yes.
Taylor, Louise Fazakali, Sohaima Manzoor Khan,
Yeah.
Sila Katebi, Sean Mahoney, Stephen James Smith as well from Ireland.
Yeah.
So these are all individual poets that I've worked with.
Yeah.
Kevin P. Gilday from Scotland as well. But also there was a project called Disarm Hate. And
Right.
basically what we did was there was a documentary called Disarm Hate, which followed a group of LGBTQ activists from
Yeah.
LA to
Mhm.
DC in the wake of the Orlando nightclub massacre. They
Right.
basically wanted to go to Washington DC to protest against gun laws,
Yeah.
and they made a documentary following their road trip across the US, and it's this incredible documentary. And
Mhm.
the team in LA actually reached out to me and said, "Look, we've got these interview clips that we've
Yeah.
layered over the soundtrack. Would you release it as an album?"
Right.
And I said, "Well, it's a poetry record label,
Yeah.
but what I want to do is commission 16 leading LGBTQ poets to respond to the documentary, and we'll
Right.
release
Yeah.
an album that has
Yeah.
like poem, interview."
Yeah.
And I was very fortunate that I managed to get Arts Council funding and
Yeah.
make that a reality. And that's a project that I'll always be immensely proud of,
Yes.
just because it gave poets an opportunity to respond, and it's this, 2 LP gatefold vinyl. So
Yes.
it's I'd rather do one thing every year than 10 things in
Yeah.
a year. Uh,
Yeah.
but since then, also like we mainly just events producers, so we run a couple of nights in Leeds. We've run events around the UK,
Mhm.
festivals, back rooms of pubs, theatres, art centres. So the website is
Start telling
nymphs.
us the names then uh,
Sorry.
of the nights of the different
Oh,
festivals.
so our we have a night called Tub Thumping in Leeds, and we also have a night called Livewire, which is
Yep.
slightly more sporadic, but we've got a few I'm going to be announcing very soon. So the website is nymphsandthugs.net, and
Right.
everything's on there: releases, artists,
Okay.
events, everything.
Thank you.
It's a labour of love.
Now it doesn't come across like that. It just seems like you do. Thank you. I wanted to ask you about uh, about one of the poets you're inspired by. If you tell us about another poet, please, a little bit, and if you have any of their work to share. If you don't,
Oh yeah, so I wanted to read a poem actually by a poet called Najwan Darwish, who I've been reading recently. Najwan Darwish, he's a poet from Jerusalem. He's published 8 collections in Arabic, and it's been translated into loads of languages around the world. He had a few collections published by the New York Review of Books,
right,
but I've got one of his collections called. I've got one of his collections which was published by the Poetry Translation Centre.
right.
Um, and so I want to read one of his poems, which is called We Never Stop.
Thank you.
I have no country to return to, and no country to be banished from. A tree whose roots are a running river. It dies if it stops, it dies if it doesn't. On the cheeks and arms of death, I spent the best of my days, And the land I lost each day, I gained each day anew. The people had a single country, but mine multiplied in loss, renewed itself in absence. Its roots, like mine, are water. If it stops, it withers. If it stops, it dies. Both of us are running with a river of sunbeams, a river of gold dust that rises from ancient wounds, and we never stop. We keep on, never thinking to pause so our two paths can meet. I have no country to be banished from, no country to return to. I'll die if I stop. I'll die if I keep going.
Wow.
Najwan, like it, trying to understand what people are going through. I feel like the first thing you should do is turn to the poets. Like, if you really want to find out what's actually happening, not journalists, not documentaries, not articles, poets. And like reading Najwan's work, it's just like I feel incredibly privileged to be reading it thousands of miles away, sat in my room. But like, I feel like it's such a valuable way to try and understand or to gain an insight. And I've got such adoration for the way that he expresses things and frames things.
I'll
So
second
yeah,
that.
yeah,
I'll second that because last year I was reading, I read a phrase and it said, if you want to understand true history, it read the poets of that time.
totally, yeah.
Because again, we mess about with history. I belong to two different continents, and the history I've read on both of them is, having to look at both of them and lived in both of them, I know how it's written and
Yeah.
glorified and glossified and
Oh.
etc. But the poetry is where you will get the truth. It's
This
not
is
going
one
to
of
be
the
glossified. It will tell you what it was at that time.
this is one of the terrifying things. Like growing up in Britain, being educated in Britain, like what I learned as history and what what I've not taught myself, but what
Yes.
I've decided to then learn as history afterwards is two very different things. Even learning about the situation in Ireland. So like I have
Yes.
heritage from Ireland, and
Yes.
it's it's phenomenal to think the differences between the two. So reading a lot of Irish poetry that speaks a lot about that. It's just, yeah, like you say, turn to the poets first. So Najwan Darwish is one of the poets that I'm turning to at the moment.
Thank you. I'd like to know about your indie act now, please. So skint and demoralize. How often do you turn up? What do you do? Where do you turn up? What
Oh
are you
no,
doing?
it's well, we're not so much anymore, unfortunately. So when I was doing that poetry when I was a kid, when I was getting on stage in bands, whatever, I started uploading some of my poems to MySpace, the
Right.
OG social media, MySpace. And somebody found me online and said, "Look, I'm working on these instrumentals. I'm looking for a vocalist. Would you be up for layering some of your poems over some of my instrumentals?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, whatever." Um, and we struck up a great friendship and we struck up a great songwriting partnership. And within a couple of months, we'd written some songs which we thought were fairly decent. So I got a CD and I wrote my MySpace URL on it and I sent it in to Steve Lamacq, who was at the time at Radio 1. He was kind of like the John Peel late night Radio 1 slot. And he loved it and played it. And then a week later, somebody else, Colin Murray, played it. And then a week later, he played it again. And basically, within 9 months, we signed a record deal with Universal. It just went. So at the age of 19, I became a professional musician. And I still wrote poetry, but we toured the UK quite a lot, played festivals around the UK and Europe. We went to record in New York. It was this mind-blowing experience for a couple of years, and then it completely the rug was completely pulled from under my feet. And I
How?
went through quite a well. We kind of started building up, and we were like the next big thing in all the newspapers, and we're on TV and radio, whatever. But there was this one song that was meant to be our breakthrough summer smash, and it was on the Radio 1 playlist. There was one week where we were played more times on Radio 1 than Lady Gaga. It was all set to happen, and then
Yes.
this is crazy. It was something like number 18 in the midweek charts, and then on the Thursday night, Michael Jackson died, and all of his songs flooded the top 100, and our song just went. So they ended up dropping us. We're just like, right, that's it, done, that's it, dropped. So like, it was this crazy experience. And like, I was living in London. I suddenly ran out of money. I've kind of become quite dependent on alcohol at the time. I had to move back home to my mum and dad and just completely. But I was only like 20,
Yes.
so I had to like reset my life.
Yeah.
And it took me, to be honest, in hindsight, it took me a long time to process it and get over it. But we continued writing music and we continued making albums and touring until about 2013. At 2013, I kind of realised that maybe the music was running its course a little bit. And then I
Yeah.
went to Glastonbury and saw Kate Tempest perform at Glastonbury and did a few
Oh,
poetry gigs myself and was like, okay,
yes.
I want to be a poet. I want to go back to poetry.
Yes.
We did actually get back together to release another album in 2019, and we were starting to build up a bit of momentum, but then the pandemic struck, and I've moved up north, and David's moved to Kent, and I've become a dad, and
Yeah.
we might make another album, but
Yeah.
I'm not so much in a band anymore. But it's been a huge part of my career,
Yeah.
and I was like in the songs, I'm mainly speaking in the verses and singing in the choruses, so it was very much poetry set to music, as much
Yeah.
as there were songs. Like my
Yes.
identity as a poet was
Yeah.
at the forefront of it. And I think it kind of helped my poetry. In some ways, it hindered my poetry when I came to start writing
Yeah.
poetry on its own. Like
Yeah.
it's complicated, but
Yeah.
to be honest, I probably wouldn't have the career that I've got now had I not done that, because of some of the
Yeah.
connections that I made, the
Yes.
profile that it gave me, etc.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm hugely grateful for it.
I'm always I'm actually usually upset by how external events can impact so much of everything like a person's done or something, and it's like something else happens outside and it impacts you. You think, hang on, stop, just wait. This was going on fine for me. Can you, like,
Yeah,
yeah, isn't it? Yeah, and that's happened to you twice. So the pandemic second time. So for both of you guys, can you kind of go see I don't know, a fortune teller next time before you do your album and say, what events are happening in the world? Is there a pandemic coming up? A famous singer about to
I'll
leave
just roll with
because
it. It'll be all right.
we want that gap. Bless you.
It's all good. It's an anecdote. It's fine.
Yeah, it's now an anecdote. Good.
Yeah.
I want to know how you feel you're well. Where do you get your inspiration from, your truth from that actually motivates you? What do you do?
That's a good question. That's a good question. Um, so at the moment, I'm trying to write a lot more personally. I think had been guilty for quite a while of hiding behind political poetry, talking about issues that affect other people, issues that I maybe I'm invested in to an extent, but I'm looking at the world and reflecting on it. And I spent 4 years from 2019 to 2023 writing a novel, and since then, when I've come back to poetry, I kind of feel like I've had to start again as a poet, and I'm looking more inward. And I saw this quote, I can't remember who the quote was by, but it was like, if you want to write great poetry, hold up the thing that hurts you the most and talk about it.
Wow.
Um, so at the moment, I've got this concept for a collection, and I realize it's at several stages of my life, the last stage of which is becoming a dad. But I'm basically trying to look at the moments that feel the most sensitive,
Yeah.
feel the most, and I'm trying to just go, okay, get to the guts of that.
Right.
But also like I'm trying to capture just the beautiful, small,
Yes.
delicate moments of everyday life. Like I'm trying to do that more. It sounds weird, but one of the reasons I did this was I was like, well, who cares about my life? Who cares about what I think? Like I'll talk about this issue that you're all already interested in. I'll do
Yes.
like, who cares about
Yes.
me and my, and like, because I always felt like that was self-indulgent, but like you're a poet, like that's what you do as a poet. So like I'm kind of learning to talk about that sort of stuff more. So I guess I'll either challenge myself to just step back and capture the little moments of everyday life that are, find the universal in the particular, as we say, or
Yes.
if I'm feeling a bit braver, I'll be like, that part of my life, then that was the worst bit. Write about that. I'm kind of trying to go for the jugular a bit more. So I suppose that is two. Like, one of them's conscious and one of them's subconscious. So maybe the capturing
Yes.
the beauty of everyday life is more subconscious.
Yeah.
But to be honest, my head moves at 2,000 miles an hour. So if I've got a chance to write, it's just whichever one's whizzing around at that time. Like you said with your novel, okay, that's the one I fancy writing today. I think that's one of the
Yeah.
most valuable things you can learn as a writer. You don't have to write chapter 1, then chapter 2, then chapter 3, then chapter 4. And with me, it's just picking whichever idea is in my head at that time, I suppose. Yeah. But I've got so much stuff going on in my head and so much stuff that I'm trying to reflect. So this is the thing. One, becoming a dad, obviously, but there's so much to talk about there and so much to reflect on. And I really am now in a different phase of my life. But also the fallout with the music stuff and like the drink dependency, like I'm only just starting to write about that. And to be honest, like I feel like I'm only just starting to properly process and understand it, if that makes sense. And I'm using my poetry to do that. So I guess I'm kind of, those are the two, like this traumatic, relatively period, and then also now this new period of life that I'm reveling in. I'm kind of holding those two up next to each other because it's only now that I've got that I can fully confront that.
It's interesting, isn't it? You need that space, that energy, you feel okay enough to be able to look at something, don't you?
Yeah. I'm a dad now. That's in the before times. So now I can write about it.
Good. I'm glad you're giving yourself permission to. I look forward to, and I know there'll be a lot of people who will be looking forward to seeing that, because it, I find, and I was going back to the fact about like it writing for experience. In this case, it's about the positive of it, of the fact that it's like, for example, Simon Pickles, when he stands up and shares poems about his drug addiction or what he's gone through, etc. You pay attention, don't you? Because you know how he's written and the details he's given. So I look forward to reading those, and thank you.
Cheers.
The last question then I want to ask is, for somebody who works in schools, somebody who's a young dad, you write poetry, when you're talking, you can see the gazillion projects moving around in your head like stars sparkling. What do you do to relax? What do you do to look after yourself physically, mentally, emotionally? Are you okay?
I
don't say that, Matt.
When our son has gone to sleep, one of us will cook a meal and we'll sit down and watch EastEnders. And everything's calm now. It's our time together. We will watch EastEnders and then we'll read together in bed. Maybe we'll watch a film together, and that like unwinding at the end of the day with my wife is so valuable and so important. And like that, I'm not going to do any work. I'm not going to do anything I don't want to do. I'm not going to do any housework at that time. Like I'll do housework in the day. That's the time when it's like, okay, this is us now. And I think without that, I don't think I'd be able to cope. If I'm on my own, then reading. I just love to read. But to be honest, like I try not to spend too much time reading. I love reading poetry and novels, but I think it's also important. I read about football. Like I know I'm really obsessed with football. I have been since I was a kid. And I think it's important to not always be reading something that's, this is going to stimulate and this will give me ideas. Sometimes you just need to escape, right?
Yes.
So reading about football. I actually prefer reading about it to watching it. I know it's really weird. I prefer listening to it on the radio than watching it as well. I don't know why, but just something. It brings me back to being a kid. And also like, if it's a good commentator, I love how they bring it to life and frame it. Whereas on TV, it's all like knee jerk and sensationalist. And I don't know. But yeah, that's what I do to unwind. It's a shame that football's such a stressful hobby, but never mind.
I'm going to ask that question to lots of men now. Do you prefer reading about it? Do you prefer watching it? I can't imagine many of them are going to give your answer.
No, I don't think
what do you mean reading about it? Yeah.
Do you know what else I really like? Washing up. I know that's weird, but I really enjoy doing the washing up. I don't know.
When I put this show out, make sure your wife's not watching. Then you're getting all of it, then, aren't you?
No. I insist. I want to do it. EastEnders is finished. I'm going to wash up before we do the next thing. I love it. It's methodical. I stack in a particular way. I like the finality of it, the completion of a task. Because like I think I've got ADHD and like I never finish tasks. But with washing up, I finished a task and you get such satisfaction out of it and stacking it. And I don't know why. I shouldn't have confessed that really, but I love washing up.
I think it.
Find it relaxing.
I was going to say that's the thing, isn't it? It's certain activities of what you're doing and how you're doing it, and like you said, if that does give you that finality and it's stacked and looked at, complete and done, yeah. I think you're going to have to use that metaphor for each of the next task that you don't finish. and see it as the dishes. Okay, this is the next stage. And now I'm just serving them, and now that that task is done now.
It's a good shout. Good shout.
It's been wonderful talking to you.
Thank you.
Apart from Nymphs and Thugs, you've got 2 books you mentioned. As where can people get a hold of them? And is there any other labels, websites, social media? Where can we find?
So my website is mattabbotpoet.com,
Mm-hmm.
and all of my socials are at mattabbotpoet. And on the homepage, you will find links to books, albums, everything. Everything's on my website. I keep it up to date as best I can. It's quite neat and tidy. So mattabbotpoet.com or mattabbotpoet on the socials. I would love to see you. I'm on TikTok. I don't use it as much as I should, but I'm trying.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Thank you so much for.
Try, isn't it?
I know, yeah. But thank you, honestly, thank you so much for allowing me to join this space and to share my thoughts and ideas. It's been great to chat to you, and to be a part of this. It's lovely.
Thank you very much for coming. It's an absolute joy. I knew it would be. And I hope you have a lovely day.
Likewise.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. I've removed him, put him back on, removed him again. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed Matt's interview and meeting him. And I hope you'll check out his work. He does absolutely fabulous work and is a really good egg. And if you don't believe me, you can speak to Claire Crossdale, because she will confirm that he's a really good egg. I look forward to seeing you in the next show, and thank you very much. Bye.